as we discuss these issues that really do affect every single American as schools are going back. Those that are going back like this week.
Yep.
So we're going to see in these next couple weeks, is that going to be a viable option, in-person, in-class schooling? We've got all those students that we're representing. I'm on a call right after radio today about the situation out of New Hampshire potentially as well. So, I mean, there's a lot going on. But Ari Fleischer had this to say. It was, it's interesting that here we have a Republican president and Republicans ready to dole out extra government assistance. And who's standing in the way? The left.
Interesting.
Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, Bite 21.
It's a real role reversal. I'm used to decades of politics in Washington in which the Democrats positioned themselves as the only people who cared because they were willing to spend money, and that was the definition of caring in Washington. And Republicans came across as a group of accountants and bookkeepers who constantly said no. Well, what's happened here? President Trump has flipped the tables. He is trying to get help to those who are unemployed. And the Democrats are coming across like a group of accountants and lawyers who are saying we can't do it.
So this is done for one reason only, and it's politics. Because if you look at what the president's outlined in the federal unemployment aid, calls for $400 a week supplement, similar to what was done last time, requires the states to pay for 25% of the $400 weekly supplement, so the federal government's picking up 75%. Diverts $44 billion from FEMA in order to do this. Extra unemployment help would last until December 6th or until the disaster relief fund balance drops to $25 billion. Aid is on top of the existing state unemployment benefits. State payments, do widely vary depending on state to state, but the idea is to try to keep money in the pockets of the American people. Jordan, you just mentioned the school situation.
Yeah.
I saw over the weekend there is talk now about getting direct aid. We've got federal legislation talking about direct aid. We'll get an update from Stan on where that might be. But this is becoming a real conversation piece as the return to school, which ties right into this unemployment situation.
Oh, yeah.
There's just a lot of unknowns right now.
So many unknowns. I mean, Than, we have the School Choice Now Act. We've had people like Senator Rand Paul say, you know what, every federal dollar that goes towards education should just be allocated to parents right now because there's so much uncertainty. Your school could be going back this week. But with that big, huge asterisk that says, if we have a surge in COVID, we'll have to figure something else out. So that's for those schools that are even trying to go back. And I guarantee you, however that works, it will impact then the schools that were planning to go back, in a couple more weeks and a couple more weeks. So if it doesn't work in a couple of these places that go back earlier, then it's going to have a ripple effect across the country, and parents are going to be that are planning for school to be coming back, like in my child's case, it's supposed to be August 31st. So if, though, all the other schools that went back earlier in her state have had to close because of COVID outbreaks, that's going to reset everything for every single parent in her school and other schools like it that were going back a little later because they're going to have to make those calls on whether to try and reopen or not and how to do school virtually for very young kids.
Jordan, I really think we've been ahead of the curve on this one in Washington, D.C. We've been advocating for several months now, really, that there's got to be more flexibility on the state and local level with the federal dollars that are sent down to the states. And, Jordan, we've been backing the School Choice Now Act by Senator Scott and Chairman Alexander, as you noted. Jordan, the support for that kind of approach is rapidly building in Washington, D.C. You mentioned the legislation from Senator Paul. That would actually go beyond what Senator Scott's legislation was. His legislation addresses about $23 billion in federal spending and gives flexibility to parents of teachers. Rand Paul wants to get to as much of that $68 billion in federal spending government-wide as he can and create flexibility because, as you note, the school districts that would have been receiving it, many of them are not opening. So, Jordan, I think all of the momentum in Washington, D.C. is moving toward the approach that we've been advocating for some time now. Now, of course, the challenge is going to be getting a vehicle like the stimulus bill across the line so that some of those ideas can be implemented. But, Jordan, I would tell you this. It's only because the message that we've been pushing has led the way in Washington, D.C. that now policymakers are following suit.